The sound of tearing cardstock at LAX Terminal 4 was louder than any jet engine. My father's hand didn't tremble as he ripped my first-class ticket into jagged pieces. I stood frozen, watching the confetti of my hard-earned vacation fall to the grease-stained floor. Then came the sting, a sharp, cold slap that sent my head spinning. My father, Richard, leaned in close, his smirk dripping with pure malice. "You're staying home, Elena," he hissed, the words cutting deeper than the blow. "Ava needs a nanny, not a sister. Take the baby and get out of our sight. We don't need you in Hawaii." My sister Ava didn't even look up from her phone, her cruel smirk mirroring his. They thought they'd left me broken on the curb with a screaming infant. What they didn't know was that I held the keys to their entire paradise, and I was about to turn their dream trip into a devastating nightmare. Before I start, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? It means a lot to me. My name is Elena. I'm 28 years old, living and working in the fast-paced world of Los Angeles. For the last several years, I've poured my heart and soul into my career as a high-end property manager. I handle multi-million-dollar portfolios, negotiate complex leases, and manage high-profile clients with ease. I'm professional, I'm organized, and I'm successful. But to my parents, Richard and Martha, none of that seems to matter. To them, I'm not a daughter with a career or a life of her own. I'm a resource. I am what I call the convenience. I'm the person they call when the sink is leaking, when their taxes are confusing, or when they need someone to bail them out of a personal mess. But that morning at LAX, the convenience finally ran out of patience. Standing there, watching my flight tickets flutter to the ground like trash, I realized that I wasn't a person to them. I was just a tool they tried to use until it stopped fitting their needs. I was supposed to be on that plane. I had earned that seat. I had paid for my part. Instead, I was told my only purpose was to serve as a live-in nanny for my sister's child while they sipped cocktails on the beach. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their aloha into an absolute devastating nightmare, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you've ever felt like the black sheep, the scapegoat, or the unpaid family servant, you're in the right place. Stories like mine need to be shared so we all know we aren't alone in this struggle. Also, please drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I genuinely love reading your responses and seeing this community grow across the globe. Now, to truly grasp why my father thought he could get away with that slap and that smirk, we have to go back, way back. Because the betrayal at the airport wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move rooted in years of toxic favoritism. Let me show you how it all really began. To understand the slap at the airport, you have to understand the 28 years of silent bruising that came before it. In our house in the suburbs of Los Angeles, there were two sets of rules. One for Ava, the golden child, and another for me, the reliable one. My parents, Richard and Martha, didn't just favor Ava. They worshipped at the altar of her potential while treated my reality like an inconvenience. It started small, the way these things always do. I remember my 7th birthday. I had asked for a specific Lego set, the big castle one. I'd talked about it for months. On the morning of my birthday, I unwrapped a small box to find a pack of generic brand markers and a coloring book from the dollar store. My mother smiled that thin, practiced smile and said, "Elena, you're so practical. You don't need those expensive toys. Besides, we have to save for Ava's gymnastics camp." Ava wasn't even interested in gymnastics, but she got the $2,000 camp, the custom leotards, and the private coaching. I got markers that ran out of ink by Tuesday. By the time we reached high school, the divide wasn't just a crack, it was a canyon. When Ava turned 16, my parents threw a party that the entire neighborhood talked about for weeks. They rented a tent, hired a DJ, and the grand finale was a brand new white Mercedes C-Class sitting in the driveway with a massive red bow on the hood. I watched from the sidelines, the same girl who had spent the last year working 20 hours a week at a local diner just to afford my own school clothes. 4 months later, it was my 16th birthday. There was no party, there was no tent. My father handed me a set of keys to a 10-year-old rusted sedan they'd found on Craigslist. "It's a car, Elena," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "You should be grateful. Ava needs the Mercedes for her image. She's going places. You just need to get to your shift at the diner." I spent my weekends detailing Ava's car while she spent hers driving my friends to parties I wasn't invited to. If I complained, I was sensitive. If I cried, I was dramatic. I learned to be a ghost in my own home. The real betrayal, the one that set the stage for my revenge, happened during college applications. I had worked my skin to the bone to maintain a 4.2 GPA. I was accepted into the University of Southern California, USC, for their prestigious business and accounting program. When I showed my father the acceptance letter, I expected pride. Instead, he sighed. "Elena, USC is expensive," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, the one I'd polished the week before. "We've decided to put our resources into Ava's career. She wants to be an influencer, a brand. That requires professional equipment, travel, and a specific lifestyle. It's an investment. You're smart. You can get loans. An accountant can always pay back debt, but a star needs a head start." So, Ava went to a private liberal arts college on their dime, spending 4 years majoring in social media marketing and personal branding, while I worked 3 jobs. I was a night shift security guard, a library assistant, and a freelance bookkeeper. I lived on ramen and caffeine, graduating with $60,000 in student debt. Meanwhile, Ava graduated debt-free, with a brand that consisted of 50,000 bought followers and a closet full of designer clothes my parents paid for. Even after graduation, the labor remained invisible. I landed a job at a top-tier property management firm in Beverly Hills. I was making good money, but every cent was spoken for: rent, loans, insurance. Ava, however, decided she was burnt out from the rigors of being a 22-year-old influencer. She moved back into the family home. My parents turned the guest wing into a content studio for her. They paid her car note, her health insurance, and even her brunches with other influencers. One night, about 3 years ago, I was over for Sunday dinner. The one day a week I was allowed to see them, provided I brought the wine and helped with the dishes. Ava was complaining about a hater on TikTok. "It's just so exhausting, Elena," Ava sighed, picking at her organic salad. "People are so jealous of my success. They don't see the work." I looked at her, then at the $4,000 Chanel bag sitting on the chair next to her. "Ava, you don't have a job," I said quietly. "Mom and Dad pay for everything. Maybe if you worked a few hours, the haters wouldn't bother you so much." The table went silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator. My father slammed his hand down so hard the silverware jumped. "How dare you?" Richard hissed. "Your sister is building a legacy. She's an artist. You're just a bean counter, Elena. You've always been jealous of her light. You have no idea what it takes to be someone like her. You're just ordinary. And quite frankly, you're lucky we even invite you to dinner with the attitude you have." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just the reliable one. I was the scapegoat they used to make Ava feel superior. My hard work was a threat to their narrative that Ava was the successful one. To justify the hundreds of thousands of dollars they'd wasted on her, they had to convince themselves and everyone else that I was a struggling, bitter failure who was lucky to have them. I spent the next 3 years playing the part. I let them believe I was barely making rent. I let them think I was still struggling with my student loans. Why? Because the more they looked down on me, the less they looked at me. While they were busy funding Ava's failed attempts at a swimwear line and her spiritual retreats to Bali, I was quietly building an empire. I didn't tell them when I got promoted to senior portfolio manager. I didn't tell them when I started my own boutique property management LLC on the side, and I certainly didn't tell them when I used my first major commission to buy a distressed commercial holding company. To them, I was still Elena the accountant, the girl who walked to the bus stop in the rain because her rusted car finally died. But the most invisible part of my labor was the house. My parents' house in the hills was their pride and joy. What they didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that during the 2008 crash, they nearly lost it. My father's investments had cratered, and they were months away from foreclosure. My grandfather, a quiet man who actually loved me, had intervened. He bought the deed from the bank and held it in a private trust to keep them from being homeless. When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, the trust didn't go to my father. He knew Richard would just leverage the house to pay for more of Ava's dreams. He left the trust and the deed to the family home to me. "You're the only one who knows the value of a roof, Elena," he told me on his deathbed. I never told them. I let them live there, rent-free, believing they still owned it. I even paid the property taxes and the massive structural repair bills from my own secret accounts, letting them think the trust was handling it. I was literally the invisible foundation of their entire existence. I was the one paying for the very roof over the head of the man who called me ordinary and the sister who called me pathetic. And yet, despite all of this, the debt, the insults, the years of being second best, I still had a small, flickering hope that they loved me. I wanted to believe that the invitation to Hawaii was their way of saying thank you. I wanted to believe that for once, they saw me. "We want the whole family together for the 30th anniversary, Elena," my mother had said over the phone, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "It won't be the same without our rock. We've even got you a first-class seat right next to us." I was so desperate for their approval that I ignored the red flags. I ignored the fact that Ava, coincidentally, fired her nanny 2 weeks before the trip. I ignored the way my father kept asking if I'd cleared my schedule for the entire 10 days. I wanted to be a daughter again. I wanted to believe the favoritism was finally over. I had no idea that the invisible laborer was about to be asked for one final, humiliating sacrifice at the LAX terminal. I had no idea that my parents weren't bringing me to Hawaii to celebrate. They were bringing me to be the help. And as I stood there in my best travel outfit, holding my passport and my dreams of a family reconciliation, the mask was about to slip, and the golden child's true colors were about to ruin everything. But as the saying goes, when you tear a person's life apart, you'd better make sure they don't have the receipts to buy yours. And I had every single one. It happened on a Tuesday evening in late January. I was sitting in my home office, finishing up a complex tax audit for one of the commercial buildings I managed. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. The caller ID flashed, "Dad." My heart did that familiar, uncomfortable skip. Usually, a call from Richard meant a flat tire, a confusing letter from the IRS, or some tech issue with their home security system that I was expected to fix immediately. "Elena, honey," he said, his voice unusually warm. It was a tone he usually reserved for Ava when she'd reached a new follower milestone. "Your mother and I were talking. It's our 30th wedding anniversary coming up in March. We want to do something big, something special, a legacy trip." I leaned back, wary. "That's great, Dad. Are you thinking of a dinner at the club?" No, he chuckled. "We're thinking Hawaii, Maui specifically, 10 days at a luxury villa, and we want the whole family there. You, us, Ava, and the baby. It's time we put the past behind us, don't you think? We haven't always been fair to you, Elena. We know you've been working hard at that little accounting firm of yours, and we think you deserve a real break. On us." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was this it? Was this the apology I'd been waiting for since I was 7 years old? "On you?" I asked, my voice small. "Absolutely," my mother Martha chimed in from the extension. "We've saved up. We want to fly first class, stay in one of those gorgeous private estates overlooking the ocean. We want to be a family again, Elena. No more bickering. Just us, the sand, and the sunset. Please say you'll come." I wanted to believe them so badly that it hurt. Every logical bone in my body told me that Richard and Martha didn't do selfless. But the little girl inside me, the one who got the wobbly roller skates and the markers, was screaming to say yes. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were finally seeing me. Maybe they realized that Ava was a bottomless pit of needs, and I was the one who actually showed up. "I'll have to check my leave," I said, already knowing I'd move mountains to be there. "Perfect," Richard exclaimed. "And listen, since you're so good with numbers and organization, you know that bean counter brain of yours, could you handle the logistics? We've picked out a villa through a management company called Elite Pacific Portfolios, but we're having trouble with the booking portal. And the flights? Well, you know how your mother gets with airline websites. Since we're paying, could you just bridge the gap? Make sure everything is seamless?" There it was, the hook, the reason for the invitation. They didn't want my company. They wanted my competence. They wanted a free travel agent. But even then, I told myself it was a small price to pay for a first-class seat and a week of peace. "I know that company," I said, a slow smirk forming on my face that they couldn't see. I didn't just know Elite Pacific Portfolios. I had acquired the holding company that owned them 6 months ago. I was literally the boss of the person who would be approving their stay. "I can handle the bookings, Dad. Send me the details." Over the next 3 weeks, I was the one who spent hours on the phone with airlines. I was the one who coordinated the private chef for their anniversary dinner. I was the one who ensured the villa was stocked with Martha's favorite champagne and the specific organic baby formula Ava insisted upon for little Leo. Every time I felt a pang of resentment, my mother would call and coo about how excited they were to have me there. "We've even got a special surprise for you on the flight, Elena," she'd say. "You've always wanted to see the islands properly." I felt like I was finally part of the golden circle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow. I was the architect of the family joy. I even bought a new wardrobe, linen dresses, high-end swimwear, a beautiful silk gown for the anniversary night. I spent $3,000 of my own money on clothes, thinking I was finally dressing for the life I belonged in. But there were cracks in the facade. Ava would text me at 2 a.m. asking if the villa had a proper nursery or if I could ensure the staff knows I need my lattes at 7 a.m. sharp. Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she thank me. And then there was the nanny. "What about the nanny, Ava?" I asked during a family dinner 2 weeks before the trip. "Is she flying with us or on a separate flight?" Ava waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, there's been a bit of a snag with her visa, but don't worry, Elena. We've got it all figured out. It's a family trip, right? We'll all pitch in. It'll be fun." I saw the look my father gave my mother then. It was a quick, sharp glance, the kind of look two people share when they're keeping a secret from a third. My gut twisted, but I ignored it. I was so addicted to the idea of being wanted that I refused to see the trap they were setting. I had no idea that while I was booking first-class seats and arranging for hibiscus leis to be waiting at the airport, my father was already planning the moment he would tear my world apart at the terminal. I was the one doing all the work, but in their minds, I was already the one who wasn't going. March 10th, 5:30 a.m. LAX Terminal 4 was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled overhead announcements, and the sharp scent of jet fuel mixed with overpriced espresso. To anyone else, it was just a busy morning at one of the world's most crowded airports. To me, it felt like the morning of my rebirth. I had spent 3 weeks meticulously planning this trip. I'd handled the first-class upgrades, the private transfers in Maui, the villa check-ins, everything. I was wearing a new linen travel suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. For the first time in 28 years, I felt like I was part of the group. I wasn't just the girl they called to fix the Wi-Fi. I was a daughter going on a luxury vacation with her family. Richard, my father, was ahead of us, leading the way with that brisk, self-important stride he always assumed in public. Martha followed him, her designer scarf fluttering behind her, looking every bit the affluent matriarch. And then there was Ava. She was trailing behind, pushing a stroller that probably cost more than my first car, her eyes glued to her phone as she checked the lighting for her airport aesthetic vlog. She looked stressed, but in a performative, influencer kind of way. "Elena, do you have the physical copies of the boarding passes?" Richard snapped, turning back to me. "The digital ones are fine, but I want the paper backups. You know how these island systems can be." "I have them right here, Dad," I said, patting my leather carry-on. I pulled out the crisp, high-quality cardstock passes I'd printed at the office. I felt a sense of pride as I handed them to him. I'd even put them in a dedicated travel wallet. We reached Gate B32. The massive Boeing 777 sat outside the window, glowing under the early morning sun. People were already beginning to line up for the first-class boarding. I started to reach for my suitcase, ready to join them, when Martha suddenly stopped. She let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh and leaned against one of the terminal pillars. "Oh, Richard," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "I just don't know if we can do it. Ava is so overwhelmed. The baby hasn't slept, and with the nanny falling through at the last minute. It's just going to be a disaster. We won't be able to enjoy the anniversary dinner. We won't be able to go to the spa. We'll just be babysitting the whole time." Ava chimed in, her voice dripping with fake tragedy. "Mom's right. I'm exhausted, Elena. I can't be expected to manage Leo and create content for my sponsors. This trip was supposed to be a reset for my brand. Now, it just feels like more work." I felt a cold prickle of unease. "What are you talking about? We'll all take turns with Leo. That was the plan, remember? I'll help out during the day so you can film." Richard turned to me then. The mask of the proud father he'd been wearing for 3 weeks didn't just slip, it disintegrated. His eyes went cold, hard, and utterly dismissive. He took the boarding passes I'd just handed him, the ones for the first-class seats I'd painstakingly booked, and looked at mine. Then he did it. Slowly, deliberately, he gripped the edges of my ticket. Rip. The sound was small, but in my head, it sounded like a building collapsing. He didn't stop. He tore it again and again until the cardstock was nothing but jagged, useless scraps of paper. He let them go, watching them flutter down to the dirty carpet of the terminal. I stared at the floor. "Dad, what are you doing?" "You're staying home, Elena," he said. His voice was steady, devoid of any guilt. "We've thought about it, and it's the only logical solution. We can't have the trip ruined by a crying infant, and we certainly aren't going to spend our 30th anniversary doing diaper changes. You're good with kids, and you're already used to, well, being the help. You'll take Leo and Ava's heavy luggage back to the house. You can stay there for the 10 days. It'll be like a staycation for you." The room seemed to tilt. "A staycation? Dad, I took time off work. I paid for my share of the villa. I organized this entire thing. You told me you wanted me there." "We wanted the logistics handled, Elena," Martha said, not even looking me in the eye as she adjusted her sunglasses. "And you did a wonderful job. But let's be honest, you don't really fit in with the Ashfords or the other families we'll be seeing in Maui. You're so intense, so professional. It's a vacation, not a business meeting. You'll be much more useful here." "I am not a servant," I yelled, my voice finally breaking. A few people in the gate area turned to look. "I am your daughter. You can't just tear my ticket and tell me to go home like I'm some hired hand you're dismissing." Richard stepped into my personal space. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate me, just like he had since I was a child. "Don't you raise your voice at us," he hissed. "After everything we've given you? After letting you into our home? You should be grateful we're letting you stay at the house while we're gone." "I pay the property taxes on that house," I screamed, the truth bubbling up, though I didn't reveal the deed yet. "I do everything for you." That was when it happened. Richard's hand moved in a blur. Crack. The force of the slap sent my head snapping to the side. My cheek burned with a sudden, searing heat. I could taste a hint of copper in my mouth where my tooth had nicked my lip. The terminal went silent. Even the gate agents paused. I stood there, my hand slowly rising to my face, my eyes blurring with hot, stinging tears of shock and shame. Richard didn't look sorry. In fact, as he looked at me standing there, broken and humiliated in front of 100 strangers, a slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. It was the same smirk he gave whenever he'd successfully manipulated a business deal. It was the smirk of a man who thought he'd finally put a nuisance in its place. "We don't need you there, Elena," he said, leaning in so close I could smell his peppermint gum. "We need a nanny. And since you're so fond of helping, that's exactly what you're going to be. Now take the baby's bag and go. Don't make a scene. You've already embarrassed us enough today." Ava didn't even look up from her phone. She was already recording a story. "Ugh, family drama at the gate," she whispered into her mic, her own smirk visible in the screen's reflection. "Some people just can't handle it when plans change. Anyway, Maui, here we come." They turned their backs on me. Richard, Martha, and Ava walked toward the jet bridge, handing their intact tickets to the agent. They didn't look back. Not once. They walked away with the grace of people who had just finished a minor chore. I was left standing at gate B32, clutching a carry-on bag that no longer had a destination. My face was throbbing, my heart was shattered, and at my feet lay the shredded remains of the only thing I'd ever asked from them, a seat at the table. As the gate agent made the final boarding call, I looked at the scraps of paper on the floor. I looked at my father's smirk etched into my memory. And then I felt something else. The sadness didn't go away, but it was suddenly covered by a layer of ice, cold, hard, and sharp. They thought they'd left me with nothing but a crying baby and a sense of duty. They thought they'd used me for the last time. But as I turned away from the gate and walked toward the exit, I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. They forgot one very important thing. In their world, image is everything. But in my world, the one they called boring and accountant-like, the person who controls the paperwork controls the reality. Richard wanted a nanny? Fine. He was about to find out what happens when the nanny owns the nursery, the house, and the very air he breathes. The shocking surprise wasn't coming. It was already here. I pulled out my phone and swiped to my business portal. "Cancel all authorizations for Elite Pacific portfolios," I whispered, my voice trembling with a new kind of energy. "And lock the primary credit line for the Morrison anniversary account, now." The nightmare was just beginning for them, and for once, I was the one who was going to enjoy the show. I didn't cry as I walked away from gate B32. I didn't give the onlookers the satisfaction of seeing the scapegoat break down. My cheek was still throbbing from the impact of my father's hand, a hot, rhythmic pulse that served as a drumbeat for the cold rage settling in my chest. I walked through the terminal, weaving through crowds of happy travelers, pushing a stroller I didn't want and dragging 3 suitcases that weren't mine. To the world, I looked like a nanny who had just been scolded. Inside, I was a woman who had just been liberated. The first thing I did when I reached the parking garage was leave Ava's heavy luggage right there, next to a concrete pillar in Section 4C. I didn't care if it was stolen. I didn't care if the airport security had to blow it up. I took only the baby's essentials and my own carry-on. I drove my rusted sedan, the one my father mocked, back to the house in the hills. The house they called ours, but I called the evidence. As I pulled into the driveway of the $2.8 million Mediterranean-style villa, I looked at it with new eyes. For years, I had maintained this property. I had hired the landscapers, negotiated with the pool contractors, and personally overseen the roof repair in 2022 that cost $45,000. My parents thought the family trust handled the bills. They didn't realize that I was the trust. I sat on the white leather sofa in the living room, the one I'd paid to have professionally cleaned after Ava spilled red wine on it last Thanksgiving, and opened my laptop. It was 7:45 a.m. Their flight to Honolulu was somewhere over the Pacific, 10,000 feet in the air, with another 5 hours of first-class comfort remaining. They were probably sipping mimosas right now, laughing about how they'd finally handled me. I opened a file on my desktop labeled The Morrison Holdings. Inside were documents that would make a forensic accountant weep. You see, like Edna and Virginia, I had been documenting everything. Since my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, I had been the silent owner of this very roof. My father, Richard, had been a VP of sales for a firm that went under in 2015. He had no pension, no savings, just a sense of entitlement that outweighed his bank balance. He had leveraged this house twice to pay for Ava's lifestyle brand and her failed jewelry line. In 2019, when the bank was days away from seizing the house, my grandfather had stepped in. But he was smart. He knew Richard would just burn through the equity again. So he bought the deed outright through a private LLC and named me the sole beneficiary and manager. He told me, "Elena, your father is a man who builds sandcastles and calls them fortresses. You are the one who knows how to mix the concrete. Hold on to this until you need it." I had the deed. I had the tax records, and I had the 156 logged incidents of what Owen Fitzpatrick would call systematic emotional abuse. Every time my mother called me a bean counter, every time my father dismissed my career, I had noted it, not out of spite, but for clarity. Because when you're gaslit for decades, you start to doubt your own reality. You need receipts to remind yourself that the too sensitive girl is actually a victim of a coordinated strike. But the house was just the beginning. The real, shocking surprise was Maui. I logged into the internal portal of Elite Pacific Portfolios. As the senior portfolio manager and the majority stakeholder of the parent company that acquired them last year, I had administrative override on every booking in their system. I found the reservation, Morrison Anniversary, Villa Hibiscus. The total cost for the 10-day stay was $32,000. It had been paid for with a corporate card my father used for his consulting business. What he didn't know was that I had authorized that credit line as a favor to him 2 years ago, using my own firm as the guarantor. I was literally the one vouching for his creditworthiness. I looked at the screen. My mouse hovered over the cancel reservation button. "Stay home and take care of the baby," my mother had said. "We don't need you there," my father had smirked. Fine. If they didn't need me there, they certainly didn't need my money, my assets, or my company's luxury villa. I didn't just cancel the booking. I marked it as fraudulent activity detected. This triggered an automatic notification to the resort's security and the car rental agency. In the eyes of the Maui staff, Richard Morrison wasn't a high-flying anniversary celebrant. He was a potential identity thief whose credit credentials had just been flagged as high risk. Then I moved to the credit cards. I called the concierge service for the black card my father carried. "Yes, this is Elena Algood, the primary account guarantor for the Morrison Consulting LLC," I said, my voice as cold as a surgical blade. "I'd like to report the secondary cards as compromised. Please place an immediate hold on all transactions, especially those originating in the Hawaii area. Yes, I understand this will decline all current charges. No, I do not wish to authorize a travel override." With a few clicks, I had effectively stranded them. They were on a plane, heading toward an island where they had no car, no hotel, and no way to pay for a bottle of water. They had treated me like a servant, so I decided to show them what it's like when the servant stops serving. I spent the next 3 hours doing what my father calls bean counting. I contacted the realtor I'd been speaking with for months. I had already listed the Los Angeles house for sale quietly 3 weeks ago. I'd been waiting for a reason to sign the final paperwork. The buyer was a tech executive who wanted a quick close. "Finalize the sale," I told the realtor. "I'm exercising the vacant possession clause. The current occupants are on an extended vacation. They won't be returning. Have the locks changed by 4 p.m. today." By noon, I had undone their entire life. I had sold their house, canceled their vacation, and cut off their oxygen. I looked at little Leo, Ava's baby, who was sleeping peacefully in the portable crib. He was the only innocent one in this mess. I called my best friend, a pediatric nurse like Ella, and asked if she could take him for a few days. "I have a family emergency," I said. And by emergency, I mean I'm finally putting out a fire that's been burning for 28 years. I sat back and looked at the clock. Their flight was scheduled to land in Honolulu in 2 hours. They would go to the rental car counter. They would try to swipe the card. It would be declined. They would call the villa. They would be told there is no reservation. They would call the credit card company. They would be told the primary guarantor has flagged them for fraud. And then they would call me. I realized then that I wasn't the reliable one because I was weak. I was the reliable one because I was the only thing holding their hollow, performative world together. I was the foundation, the bank, the landlord, and the logistics coordinator. I was the chief surgeon of their survival, and they had just fired me in the most public, humiliating way possible. Like M&A's warriors, I didn't need 200 strangers to show up. I had the law, I had the deeds, I had the bank statements. I was a one-woman army of receipts. I remembered what my grandfather said about the sandcastles. My father had spent his life building an image. He had spent his life trying to look like a man of means while stepping on the very daughter who provided those means. He thought the smirk at the airport was his victory lap. He didn't realize he was smirking at the person who owned the ground he was standing on. I poured myself a glass of that expensive wine my mother liked, the one she'd never thanked me for buying. I sat in the silent, beautiful house that would belong to someone else by sunset. I waited. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel dramatic or sensitive. For the first time in my life, I felt the heavy, satisfying weight of justice. The airport slap was the last time a Morrison would ever lay a hand on me. From here on out, if they wanted to talk to me, they'd have to do it through my lawyers, my realtors, or my silent bank accounts. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. The caller ID said, "Dad." The plane had landed. The nightmare had begun. I didn't answer. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the heat of the Maui sun on the curb of the airport first. I wanted them to realize exactly what it feels like to be not needed. While I was sitting in the quiet, empty house in Los Angeles, watching the sunset cast long shadows over the marble floors I'd polished for years, 5 hours away, the Morrison family was landing in Honolulu. I could almost picture them. My father, Richard, walking off the plane with that puffed-out chest, acting like he owned the terminal. My mother, Martha, already complaining about the humidity and her hair. And Ava, probably ignoring little Leo's fussing as she scanned the crowd for the driver she assumed I had arranged. But there was no driver. There was no lay greeting. And there was no luxury SUV waiting at the curb. My phone started buzzing at 2:45 p.m. I let it vibrate against the mahogany coffee table. I didn't even look at the screen. I knew it was Richard. He'd be standing at the rental car counter, his face turning that specific shade of purple it gets when things don't go his way. Then came the texts from Ava. "Elena, where is the car? We've been standing here for 20 minutes. Pick up." I waited. I poured myself a second glass of wine, the $200 vintage my father had been saving for his big anniversary. I figured since I was the one who actually paid for the climate-controlled storage where he kept it, I was entitled to a glass, or the bottle. At 3:15 p.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered. "Elena, what the hell is going on?" Richard's voice was a roar, muffled by the ambient noise of the airport. "The rental agency says the reservation for the Escalade was canceled, and when I tried to swipe the corporate card for a backup, it was declined. They said there's a fraud alert on the account. Fix it. Now." I took a slow sip of the wine. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "How is the weather in Honolulu? I hear it's quite warm this time of year." "Don't give me that attitude," he hissed. "I don't care about the weather. I care about the fact that we're stranded here with 5 suitcases and a crying baby. Call the bank. Tell them I'm the authorized user. And call the rental place. I know you messed something up in the booking." "I didn't mess anything up, Richard," I said. "I handled the logistics perfectly, just like you asked." "Then why are we sitting on our luggage like homeless people?" he yelled. "Because," I said, leaning back into the soft leather of the sofa. "At the airport this morning, you made it very clear that you didn't need me in Hawaii. You told me you needed a nanny. You told me I didn't fit in with your image. You told me I was the help." For God's sake, Elena, it was a joke, a family disagreement. Get over yourself and fix the cards. It wasn't a joke to me, I replied. The slap wasn't a joke. The smirk wasn't a joke. And the sound of you tearing my ticket wasn't a joke. It was the sound of me finally realizing that if you don't need me there, you certainly don't need my money, my credit, or my assets there either. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. I could hear Martha in the background, her voice shrill and panicked. Richard, the villa, the management company just texted. They said the reservation for Villa Hibiscus was flagged as fraudulent and the booking is voided. We have nowhere to go. Elena, my father's voice was lower now, dangerous. What did you do? I did exactly what a professional accountant and property manager does, Richard. I audited the situation. I realized that the corporate card you're carrying is guaranteed by my LLC. Since I am no longer part of this family trip, I am no longer a guarantor for your expenses. I reported the card as compromised. As for the villa, well, you really should have looked into who owns Elite Pacific portfolios before you tried to treat their majority stakeholder like a servant. I canceled the reservation myself. You own the company? Richard stuttered. How? With what money? With the money I made while you were busy calling me ordinary and a bean counter, I said. While you were funding Ava's fake lifestyle, I was buying the ground you're currently trying to stand on. You're in Maui, Dad, a very expensive island, and right now you have no hotel, no car, and about $40 in cash in your wallet. Do you still not need me there? You're insane, Martha's voice broke in. She must have grabbed the phone. Elena, stop this right now. We are your parents. You can't do this to us. Little Leo is hot and tired. Do you want your nephew to suffer? Leo is an innocent child, Martha, I said. And yet you were perfectly happy to leave him with a woman you just called mentally unstable and a worthless dropout at the airport gate. If I'm as bad as you say I am, why would you ever trust me with your precious grandson? But don't worry about Leo. I've already contacted a local concierge service in Maui. They're bringing a car with a car seat and enough supplies for the baby. They'll take him and Ava to a modest hotel, one I've paid for in advance. But as for you and Richard, you're on your own. You can't do this! Richard was back on the line, screaming now. We're coming home. We'll be on the next flight back, and when I get there, I am going to throw everything you own onto the street. You're done in this family, Elena. You hear me? Done. That's the thing, Richard, I said, and for the first time today, I let a small smile touch my lips. There is no home for you to come back to. What are you talking about? I sold the house, I said. The silence this time was absolute. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing in real time. The house is in a trust, Elena, Richard finally whispered. You can't sell it. The trust is mine, Richard. Grandfather left it to me. He knew you'd spend it all on Ava's brand. I've been paying the taxes, the insurance, and the repairs for 5 years while you lived there for free and called me lucky to be invited to dinner. I signed the final closing papers 3 hours ago. The new owners took possession at 4 p.m. The locks have already been changed. Your clothes, your furniture, your precious awards. They're currently being moved into a storage unit in East LA. The key is with a local lawyer. I'll text you his address. You sold our home? Martha was wailing now, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. I sold my house, I corrected. The house where you slapped me. The house where you told me I wasn't enough. You wanted to live a life of luxury on my dime while treating me like dirt. That's over. You have no home, no credit, and no daughter. You told me you didn't need me. Well, congratulations. You finally got exactly what you asked for. Richard's voice was trembling. The smirk I could hear in his tone at the airport was gone, replaced by the broken sound of a man who realized he'd just destroyed the only thing that made his life possible. Elena, please, we're in Hawaii. We have nothing. How are we supposed to even get back? I don't know, Richard, I said, standing up and grabbing my suitcase. Maybe you can ask Ava's 50,000 followers to crowdfund your flight. Or maybe you can finally be practical and figure it out yourself, just like I did when I was paying off the $60,000 in debt you left me with. I hung up. I didn't block them. I wanted to see the calls. I wanted to see the realization sink in. As I walked out of the house for the last time, I looked at the golden circle photos on the wall, the ones where I was cropped out or standing in the back. I didn't take them down. They belong to the new owners now, a nice young couple who actually seemed to love each other. I got into my car and drove away. My face still felt the ghost of that slap, but my heart was lighter than it had been in 28 years. I wasn't the help anymore. I was the owner. And the Morrisons were about to find out that paradise is a very cold place when you've burned every bridge that could take you home. 6 months have passed since that humid morning at LAX and the chaotic, desperate phone calls from Maui. I often think back to the silence that followed my hanging up on Richard. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, the sound of 28 years of chains finally breaking. Since then, that silence has become my daily sanctuary. The legal fallout was swift and absolute. My parents returned from Hawaii 3 days after they landed, having spent their anniversary in a budget motel near the airport, funded by a last-minute wire transfer from one of Ava's disgruntled former sponsors. They returned to a house that no longer belonged to them. The locks were indeed changed, and their belongings were waiting in a dusty storage unit in East LA. Richard tried to sue me, of course. He claimed elder abuse and theft of a family trust. But my lawyers walked into the courtroom with binders full of property deeds, tax receipts, and documented evidence proving I had been the one funding their lifestyle for years. The judge didn't even need 10 minutes to dismiss his frivolous claims, noting that entitlement is not a legal standing. I've gone completely no contact with Richard, Martha, and Ava. I moved into a quiet, sun-drenched condo with a view of the hills that isn't tainted by their toxic presence. There are no more midnight calls for emergency help, no more being the unpaid servant for Ava's fake career, and no more insults masked as tough love. I have reclaimed my name, my success, and most importantly, my peace. Ava's influencer brand finally collapsed under the weight of her own lies. Without my silent funding, she couldn't maintain the facade. Last I heard, they were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a part of town Richard used to mock. It's a modest life, the kind of ordinary life they once looked down upon, but it's one they are finally forced to earn for themselves. Standing here now, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, I've realized that blood doesn't give anyone the right to destroy you. Being reliable doesn't mean you are a doormat. It means you have the strength to hold up a world, but you also have the wisdom to let it fall when those in it refuse to appreciate you. It took me 28 years to learn that a golden child only shines because someone else is polishing them. I stopped polishing. I stepped into my own light. To everyone listening, if you are the scapegoat, the invisible laborer, or the one whose wings are constantly being clipped by the people supposed to love you, stop crouching. Document your truth. Build your empire in the shadows. And when the time is right, don't just walk away. Take the ground with you. You were never ordinary. You were the foundation all along. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Your comments and support have meant the world to me. Remember, you are not alone, and you are always, always enough. Peace is the ultimate revenge. I'll see you in the next one.